So here I have some handguns that are chambered in some of the most popular bear defense cartridges or wilderness carry cartridges. I have two big bore revolvers and two semi-autos. These two semi-autos are chambered in 10mm auto. This revolver is chambered in 44 Magnum, and then this big one right here, the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. So let me just give you guys an up-close look. This Smith & Wesson Model 500 has a 5-shot capacity, and it weighs just under 4 pounds. That's something to consider when you're purchasing a bear defense or wilderness carry handgun, is that some of these Super Magnum revolvers weigh as much as 5 pounds. And if you're carrying a handgun that weighs 5 pounds, you might as well just get a lightweight rifle like a 308 with a short barrel and a thin contour. Okay, but this handgun right here is one of the most powerful handguns ever made. This thing can generate 2,500 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, making it almost as powerful as a 270 Winchester or 30-06, and making it as powerful as a 308 Winchester with a 20-inch barrel firing just common hunting loads. So it is a very powerful revolver, okay? And it still weighs just shy of 4 pounds, so it's still pretty lightweight. Here we have a 44 Magnum snub nose revolver. This is a Smith & Wesson Model 629 Performance Center. It has a 2 5/8 inch barrel, so it's a very short barrel. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. It has a 6-shot capacity. That's what you'll typically find on all 44 Magnum revolvers. You're going to have a 6-shot capacity with 44 Magnums, a 6 or 8-shot capacity with a 357 Magnum, and you're going to have a 5-shot capacity with what I call the Super Magnums, which are going to be the 500 Smith & Wesson and the 460 Smith & Wesson. Here we have a Glock 20 chambered in 10mm auto. Okay. And the 10mm auto is proven to be effective against large, dangerous animals, and it can generate almost as much energy as a 357 Magnum. So the 10mm auto is basically like a 357 Magnum in a semi-automatic platform. And this snub-nose 44 Magnum can generate over 800 to 900 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. So even with this tiny barrel, you're still getting a lot of firepower. Now, this Glock 20 is extremely popular for bear defense. It's been proven. Most recently, there was a bow hunter in Montana who was hunting near Yellowstone, and he purchased a Glock 20 specifically for bear defense because he was expecting to run into grizzlies in the elk zone he was hunting in. And sure enough, he had to use a Glock 20 to save his life, and it did work. So these firearms are reliable. You cannot go wrong with a Glock 20 in 10mm auto. Now, here we have a 1911 style 10mm. This is a Rock Island Armory 10mm, okay? And what's nice about this 1911 10mm is that it can accept 16 round magazines, okay? Most 10mm 1911s can only accept 8 round magazines. So that's a huge plus for the Rock Island. So let me discuss the pros and cons and what you want to look for in these handguns. So first big pro to the big bore revolvers is they have a lot more firepower than any semi-auto. Okay, any kind of revolver is going to be able to withstand higher chamber pressures because it's made of solid steel. So you can chamber a revolver for very powerful cartridges versus semi-autos. You can't. You have a limitation. And if you want to have a Magnum cartridge in a semi-auto, you're going to need a really beefy semi-auto. Just look at the Desert Eagle. The Desert Eagle is super heavy and super bulky, and it can't even generate anywhere near the power of this 500 Smith & Wesson. This 500 Smith & Wesson weighs the same as a Desert Eagle and takes up about the same amount of space as a Desert Eagle, but it's 3 times as powerful, okay? 2 to 3 times as powerful. So that's something to consider with semi-automatics, but you're going to have more powerful cartridges with revolvers than you will with semi-autos. Another thing with revolvers, that's another advantage, is reliability. Revolvers are basically the most reliable pistol platform, and the reason why is you have a cylinder, and the cylinder just turns, okay? It turns counterclockwise like this every time you squeeze the trigger, okay? So because you have a revolving cylinder, you don't have to worry about issues related to the blowback system like on a semi-automatic. You don't have to worry about jams, clearing a jam. If, let's say, you have a bear and it's charging you, you squeeze the trigger and the round doesn't go off, or you get some kind of misfire, you don't have to worry about clearing that round, racking the slide. All you have to do is just squeeze the trigger again, because the cylinder is going to rotate to the next round, okay? Now, obviously, if you get a squib load, you don't want to do that because you're going to blow your barrel apart. But if, let's say, you squeeze the trigger, you get a misfire for whatever reason, something went wrong, and you don't believe that there's a squib load, that there's basically a bullet stuck in the barrel, then you can just pull the trigger again, or squeeze the trigger again, and it's going to shoot another round, okay? So that's another big advantage to the big bore revolver, is reliability, also durability. Revolvers are made of solid steel. There's no plastic. It's very difficult to damage a revolver. The only issues with revolvers is if you have some kind of problem with the timing system of the cylinder, but you don't really have to worry about that unless you really abuse a revolver, or if you have a really old revolver, the timing can get messed up and that can cause problems. But if you have a new revolver or a high quality revolver that you take good care of, you shouldn't have any timing issues. And that's something you should always keep an eye on, is the timing with your revolver cylinder. And if you have any issues with your cylinder, get it fixed, okay? Don't carry a handgun for personal protection if you have any issues. So that's kind of a negative for the revolver, is if the cylinder gets messed up, there's some kind of alignment issue or timing issue, then you're not going to be able to fire the gun. Or if you get some kind of dirt or something in here, okay, in between the cylinder and the frame, if you get like some dirt, some sand, some ice, the cylinder's not going to want to turn, okay? So when you cock the hammer, you see how the cylinder turns, or if I squeeze the trigger, the cylinder turns, okay? If you have like ice or sand or mud or dirt, it's not going to be able to cock itself, okay? So you're going to have to physically open the cylinder and clean out whatever's in the way, whatever obstruction is in the way, and then close it up, and then you're good to go. Another thing too is sometimes this screw right here can loosen up if you're shooting a heavy recoiling revolver. And when this screw loosens up, it affects the crane. Okay, that's this piece right here. Okay, this swinging piece that holds the cylinder. And so this screw keeps that crane from slipping out of the frame. Okay, so you have to make sure you keep some kind of small screwdriver with you if you're going to carry one of these into the backcountry, in case you do have to tighten that screw for whatever reason, you find out that it loosened up from recoil. Or if you have to take off the side plate and check out some of the internals, maybe you're having a problem with the trigger, there could be some kind of oil or solvent building up inside that can affect the trigger. And that has happened to me before. I've had this screw loosen up just from shooting so much, shooting a lot of heavy recoiling rounds. This screw will eventually loosen up, so you just literally have to tighten it. And sometimes just from a lot of cleaning, you'll get like solvent and oil that's going to leak into the side plate here, and it can get into the trigger and stuff, and it can affect the trigger. So periodically you should take your side plate off and clean the inside. You don't have to do anything crazy. Just literally, if you take like a patch and you just soak up some oil or solvent that dripped in there over time, just clean everything up. Another thing that can happen too with revolvers is your main spring screw can loosen up, and that happens to me a lot, especially with my 44 Magnum snub nose, because there's a lot of muzzle flip on this thing and a lot of recoil, and it's a light handgun. So there's a screw in here that maintains tension against the main spring, and if that screw backs out from recoil, you're not going to have enough tension on your hammer, and you're going to get light primer strikes. Okay, so if you're in the backcountry and you don't have a screwdriver, you don't have a way to take the grip off and tighten that main spring screw, you're screwed. You're going to get light primer strikes. So always bring like some kind of multi-tool, like a Leatherman, with you if you're going on a backpacking trip, and always maintain your firearm. Check all the screws, make sure everything is tight. Check the side plate, make sure everything is clean in there. Check the main spring screw, make sure it's not backing out. Okay, so those are some of the negatives to a revolver, is that it could be a little bit more difficult to maintain. It requires more skill to diagnose problems, and it requires more skill to disassemble in the field, versus a semi-auto. You can field strip in a matter of seconds, and you can fix an issue relatively quickly. But with a revolver, you got to unscrew the side plate. You need a good working space, and you don't want to lose any internal parts. If you're in the middle of the wilderness in Alaska and you're taking the side plate off here and you drop a part on the ground from in here and you can't find it, you're in trouble. Okay, so that's a negative to revolvers, is they're harder to field strip, harder to maintain. They require more TLC, they require more skill to maintain, okay, versus a semi-auto. Semi-autos are basically idiot proof. You don't need to be a gunsmith to be able to maintain one and field strip one. Revolvers require a little bit more skill, and I'll talk a little bit more about skill in a moment, because that's also a big difference between revolvers and semi-autos when we talk about shooting them, okay? And so if we look at this Glock 20 here, this thing could be easily field stripped. Okay, all you got to do is just squeeze the trigger, and then it has this slide release, and look how quick that was. Okay, I literally just took this pistol apart in 2 seconds, and I can diagnose any problems. If there's any dirt in here, I can blow it out or clean it out, or I could take my shirt and wipe out any kind of crud. I can take the recoil spring out. I can take the barrel out. Okay, so very easy to field strip. Okay. Another disadvantage with the big bore revolvers is massive recoil. Okay, obviously a 500 Smith & Wesson is going to have a tremendous amount of recoil and muzzle flip, as does the 44 Magnum. Okay, so if you're somebody who can't handle recoil, or you have some kind of physical issue that prevents you from shooting a big bore revolver, it's definitely not a good choice for you. Many professional shooters struggle with big bore revolvers. It's an entirely different skill set. Takes a long time to master these, versus semi-autos, especially Glocks. You know, you could teach someone to shoot one within a few minutes, versus revolvers, it's a lot more tricky. There's some things you have to look out for. So, and another thing about revolvers is that the trigger pull is going to be 2 to 3 times that of semi-autos. So for someone who's just learning how to shoot, or someone who doesn't have time to practice, it's going to take a lot longer to master a revolver, not only to be able to shoot good at paper on a flat range, but even longer to master a revolver in stressful situations, shooting at a moving target, shooting at a target that might try to kill you. So the heavier trigger pull on a revolver requires a different technique. You have to use the crook of the first digit of your trigger finger to get better leverage against that heavy trigger versus a semi-auto pistol. You can use that soft middle part of your first digit and you can be much more precise. Shooting a revolver in general is a little bit more difficult to learn and master. It requires more patience, more time, and you can also develop a flinch from a big bore Magnum revolver as well, which is really bad. You know, revolvers require more patience to master, and they have a lot more recoil, a lot more muzzle flip, so obviously you're not going to be able to get as many rounds on the bear or on the animal or on the threat as quickly as a semi-auto, but you don't really need to. If you have a 44 Magnum or 500 Magnum, regardless of barrel length, should be a one-shot kill, okay? Even against a charging bear for the most part, even a snub-nose 44 placed in the right spot will be a one-shot kill, okay? So that's something to consider. But if you miss that first shot or that second shot, you may not get a third shot. And because the muzzle flip and the recoil takes a lot longer to recover from, you're not going to be able to get as many rounds on target. So if you miss the first or second shot, the bear might already close the distance and you might be screwed. That's why a lot of people choose the 10 millimeters, because you can get more rounds on target. And if you miss some of them, it's okay because you can recover from the recoil much faster. Also, capacity. Obviously, capacity is a big one. Okay, this Glock 20 is the king of capacity. You can get a 30-round magazine for this thing, which I have several of them, but I can't show you them on YouTube because of their community guidelines. You can get a 30-round magazine for this Glock 20, and you can stuff that 30-round mag with some bear loads, and even just that one 30-round mag, that's a lot of firepower. But if you're going to get some kind of 10 millimeter semi-auto, you definitely want to get a double stack. You don't want to get a single stack. You want to have as much capacity as possible. That's the big advantage to the semi-auto, is lower recoil and more capacity. So you want to get a double stack 10 millimeter. Both of these handguns are double stacks. Okay, the Rock Island, like I said, 16 round capacity. Same thing with the Glock 20. That one has a 15 round capacity plus one in the chamber. And then you can get the extended mag, the 30 rounder. So you definitely want to get a double stack 10 millimeter. There's other brands out there too. The FN has a 22 round magazine, but you definitely want to get something that's going to give you at least 15 rounds, because that's going to be your big advantage. If you have a 10 round 10 millimeter or an 8 round 10 millimeter, it's just not going to give you that advantage over the revolvers, okay? So with the semi-autos, we have less recoil, less muzzle flip, easier to learn, easier to field strip. They're also generally lighter weight than revolvers because revolvers are solid steel, especially with a longer barrel revolver like this 6.5-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 500. You're going to be pushing 3 to 4 pounds. If you get a snub-nose revolver, you're going to have about the same weight as these full-size semi-auto 10 millimeters, okay? But generally speaking, semi-autos are going to be lighter weight. Another thing with revolvers is they're more durable because they're made of steel. You can throw them on the ground. They're more durable. Okay, they're solid steel. You're not going to break anything. But if you have a polymer frame gun like this Glock, it's more susceptible to issues related to durability. And then this Rock Island has a solid steel frame. It's 100% steel, okay? So it's very durable. And this is an excellent handgun for bear defense. So generally speaking, when we're talking about semi-autos, the best platform is going to be a 10 millimeter. Okay, that's going to be your best cartridge, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people. And the reason why is the 10 millimeter has a moderate amount of recoil. It's readily available, and it can penetrate almost as much as a 44 Magnum. And you can get almost as much energy as a 44 Magnum with a 10 millimeter. So definitely a 10 millimeter is probably the best semi-automatic cartridge. That's what I recommend. That's what a lot of people recommend. Now, one thing to consider is cost, okay? If you're selecting a firearm, generally speaking, revolvers are going to be more expensive. These revolvers are going to cost as much as a good rifle versus like a Glock 20, for a couple $100, you're going to be out the door with it, okay? So revolvers are generally more expensive, and also the ammunition to shoot them is more expensive. These Magnum cartridges are much more expensive to shoot than 10 millimeters, okay? The cost of shooting a 500 Smith & Wesson is going to be 3 to 4 times that of the 10 millimeter, and the cost of a 44 Magnum is going to be almost double of a 10 millimeter. So you're going to be able to practice more with the 10 millimeter than the Magnum revolver cartridges, even if you hand load. Even if you hand load, it's still going to be pretty expensive. Between the bullets, the powder, the primers, the cases, it's going to add up. So generally speaking, the 10 millimeter semi-automatic is going to be much, much cheaper. You're going to be able to buy more ammo, more practice time, and you can stockpile more, okay? Also, the ammo is going to be lighter weight for a 10 millimeter, so you can carry more of it without weighing yourself down versus a 500 Magnum. If you have like 20 rounds of 500 Magnum, that's going to be pretty heavy. If you have 20 rounds of 10 millimeter, it's going to be much, much lighter, 50% lighter than 20 rounds of 500 Magnum. So that's something to consider as well. So cost of ammo, cost of the revolvers themselves. Another thing too is availability of aftermarket parts. Generally speaking, semi-automatics are more popular nowadays than revolvers in general. So there's more aftermarket parts available for semi-autos, especially Glocks like the Glock 20. Tons of sights, tons of lights, triggers, grips, barrels, you name it, you can find it. With something like a 500 Smith & Wesson, it's going to be hard to find aftermarket parts, okay? Because it's just not a firearm that a lot of people own. So that's something to consider as well. Now, one thing that you definitely want to have on all your bear defense or wilderness carry firearms, just like your concealed carry firearms, is you're going to want to have night sights, okay? All of these handguns here have night sights, okay? These night sights actually had to be custom made because I could not find any aftermarket night sights for this handgun. So I had to have these sights custom made. It took 6 months. And so I have tritium vials on the rear sight and the front sight. So these glow 24/7, okay? They're not phosphorescent. They just glow 24/7. I don't have to charge them with a light or anything like that. They glow 24/7. And I also have white outlines, okay? So during the day, I can use them as well. And it has been proven that white is actually the best color for daytime iron sights. That's why in Africa, safari guides use white colored sights because white attracts the human eye more than yellow, orange, or red. And there's been tests done to study that, and white always came out on top. So in my opinion, white is the best. Here I have night sights on my 44, also custom. And these night sights on the Glock 20 are not custom. These are just Trijicon, and they're suppressor height. Another advantage to semi-autos is you can put a suppressor on them. I have a suppressor for these pistols. Obviously, carrying a suppressor in the woods is going to be, tiring and bulky because it adds length and weight. But if that's something you want to do, you have that option. Here we also have some aftermarket sights, non-custom, okay? So you definitely want to have night sights. And the reason why is bears and even most wild animals are nocturnal or crepuscular. Crepuscular means that they're active during dawn or dusk. So you definitely want to have night sights. Another good thing about the semi-autos is that you can put lights on them versus revolvers. You can't put a light. So if, let's say, you're in a situation where a bear comes to your tent at night, you're going to have to find your flashlight and hold your flashlight. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to illuminate the target. Now, if you have some ambient light or your eyes adjusted to the darkness, you might not need the light. Okay, even just having those tritium sights, you might be able to just see a general outline of the bear or whatever animal's attacking you, and that might be enough if there's a little bit of ambient light from the moon or from the reflection of the moon on the snow or a campfire, whatever. That might be enough to give you an outline or silhouette that you can shoot at. But big advantage to the semi-autos is you can mount a light and a laser right onto them. Okay, so that's another advantage to the semi-autos. Now, so you definitely want to have a light that you can use with your firearms because, like I said, bears and most animals are nocturnal. So you can't assume that you're only going to deal with them during the daytime hours. And if you can't get night sights for whatever reason, at least have a good flashlight nearby that you can easily draw. You know, if you have a big bore revolver and you don't have night sights and you can't mount a light onto it, then keep a flashlight in some kind of quick draw holster or keep it somewhere that you can quickly access that light and pull it out. You can even keep it on your neck with a lanyard. I'll actually do that. I'll carry a small flashlight on my neck with a lanyard so I can access it quickly. I don't have to open up a pouch or reach into my pocket or anything. I know it's right there where I need it. Okay? So now I want to discuss the ammunition. What kind of ammunition should you buy and carry in bear country or in the wilderness?